The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar entitled Reaching the Final Frontier, the African Space Sector. My name is Odile Ayodele. I'm a senior researcher and the research lead on technology and society at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with the Institute, we are one of 9 flagship institutes at UJ, which started in 2016. Now, the Institute provides a forum for scholars, practitioners, and civil society actors across Africa and its diaspora to dialogue and contribute to the rigorous production and dissemination of Pan-African knowledge and culture. We also seek to promote original and innovative Pan-African ideas and critical dialogue in pursuit of global excellence in research and teaching, and to contribute actively to building an international profile for UJ on Pan-African issues. Essentially, and this is what my boss always says, Prof. Sibamandla Zondi, we look for ways to solve the wicked problems that the continent is facing. The webinar today is one such conversation. We're looking towards space, the so-called final frontier, and what benefits Africans can garner from space technologies. Now, when we think of space, we harken back to like 6 decades ago and the space race between the US and the Soviet Union, which was undergirded by Cold War tensions. And ultimately, it sucked up most of the African continent with all these battles, particularly South Africa. Now, space expansionism has returned and it's lucrative. In fact, Morgan Stanley estimates that the space economy will be worth at least $1 trillion by 2040. And the African space economy is already worth billions of dollars. Beyond talking about monetary and money and monetary value, for Africans, much of our personal interest in space has to do with how we can harness the benefits of space tech for development and dealing with issues such as climate change, rather than continuing our dependence on external sources, such as the European Commission and its Copernicus program. Now, undoubtedly, the partnership has been very fantastic for us. However, it's important for African countries to take hold of their futures and develop local talent. Now, this afternoon, we've gotten 2 fantastic speakers who would talk us through some of the applications and the benefits of space tech and talk around how to harness the benefits of the space industry. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ratizo Makumbe, to do the first introduction. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ratizo Makumbe. I am a researcher at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. I am excited to be part of this conversation. So today we are honored to have 2 speakers who are Kutso Nwasheng and Dr. Samo Oyewole. I will start with Kutso Nwasheng's bio. So Kutso Nwasheng is an award-winning manager in change at the SARO Science Processing. He is one of the leading thinkers on the 4th Industrial Revolution and government, and all things computing, space, and science. He has a passion for translating science and computation speaking into ordinary language for all to understand. As a member of the science processing at SARO, Nwasheng manages the team responsible for ingesting and synchronizing telescope data to produce images and deliver science quality data for the science community. Mr. Nwasheng applies innovative practices to lead the team in the development of high-performance computing infrastructure, highly optimized software components, as well as novel approaches to science data processing, including storage and data accessibility, innovation, machine learning, and quality assurance. His speaking highlights including speaking at the European South African Science and Technology Advancement Program, presenting at the SPI, Spectrum and Phonics Instrumentation and Engineering Conference in 2018. he was also the opening speaker at the Science Forum in 2018 and gave a keynote speak for the Center of High Performance Computing conference for both 2017 and 2018 and the SADC Working Group on High Performance Computing. We're truly honored to have such a man who has done very well in the science field. Our second speaker is Dr. Samuel Oyewele. Dr. Samuel Oyewele is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science, Federal University of Oye Ekiti, Nigeria. His area of research interests cover African affairs, military and strategic studies, neuroscience, policy, crisis management, development studies, and international relations. His articles have appeared in many journals, including Afropolitics, Australian Journal of Marine and Ocean Affairs, African Security Review, Defense and Security Analysis, Defense Studies, Geojournaling, Politiken, South African Journal of International Affairs, Strategic Analysis, and Study of Conflict and Terrorism. His co-edited books, including Power Politics in Africa, Nigeria and South Africa in Comparative Perspectives. He has also co-edited a book titled Boko Haram's Terrorist Campaign in Nigeria, Contexts, Dimensions, and Emerging Trajectories. Thank you very much for joining IPATC to explore more on African space sector webinar. I will then hand over to Kutso Mwasheng as our first speaker. Thank you.
Since I'm the first speaker, I'm just gonna make sure that a few areas are rounded up. So I apologize for any copied imagery or codes in the presentation. Yeah, all credits where it's due. So when somebody talks about the space industry or space mission, technically they're speaking about any one of those aspects of the space industry. The users, that's typically us. That could be anything from military to you looking for GPS directions or ordering via Uber. So that's a simple concept to understand, although it's like where the real industry is. Data processing and archiving is, I actually would like to do this anti-clockwise. So if you look at the mission concept, is for every space mission that goes out and gets funded, somebody has to decide what is the point of doing something that we want to do. We want to launch a satellite, what kind, when, how, what it's going to do, how long it's going to live, etc. Then you get the launch element. These are things that are making the news now, your Elon Musk's and their rockets. The launch element, it typically includes where your rockets are going to come from. This have always been industry until 20 years ago. This were dominated by the military complex, nation states. But now we're seeing a lot of independent people innovating in the space. Orbit and constellation. And this basically goes down to where is your satellite going to be in space? And this is a contentious issue, depending on where you want to put your satellite. And it's also a significant opportunity for innovation in the next 10 years. And we can talk about that elsewhere, maybe in the Q&As. Then you get the satellite, what is basically called the satellite bus and payload. What really that means is the shape and size of the satellite, and the payload is what can that satellite do? Can it hold a camera? Can it broadcast your favorite European soccer team back to wherever you're lounging on a Sunday afternoon with friends? Communication architecture speaks about how you, as the owner or the controller of the satellite or the user of the satellite, and you can imagine an agent like MultiChoice, get to communicate with the satellite, and how you get to receive feedback from that satellite. How do you get data from that satellite? It dishes on your roofs all the way to large, complex receivers that are dotted all over the planet, basically. The ground station is typically the antennas you see. This can get quite simple. And like I said, with the dish outside on top of your roof, down to as complex as an array of antennas for military purposes or other purposes. And then mission control center and operations, people who literally control and operate the satellite. And it's one of the most expensive components of a satellite. I don't know if you guys have heard about satellites that have been in space for 20, 30 years. There's somebody who has to sit there and basically make sure that those things do what they're supposed to do for all that time, and they actually continue to derive science. And then, of course, data processing. When you get data from satellites, how do you make that data a useful product for the users? That is essentially what the space industry is typically composed of. So for us, for me, working at Cereo, one may wonder, what does astronomy have to do, radio astronomy have to do with space industry? Well, where you see the smiley faces is where we really dominate. We really design the telescopes we want and what they're gonna do, which look pretty much like ground stations, and they have a lot of common technology. We do control the mission on a daily basis, basically, is part of what we do. And then a lot of data processing and users that go to scientists and all sorts of other people. But however, I added another element here called subjects and science. So for scientific instruments, typically it goes down to what are they going to observe or interact with. You have heard about people launching satellites or organizations launching satellites to land on meteorites, to Mars, or to observe certain things back on Earth. That's kind of like the object. And the science is what kind of science it's expected to be achieved, or industrial value. In other words, that's going to be achieved by the mission. And that's typically a very important thing, because it kind of like allows you to then design, have a budget, and all of other things that we understand and accountants and lawyers understand. Here's an example of a ground station for the EUMETSAT. It's the European Meteorology Satellite Complex. It's a set of satellites that basically give you data. That's where South Africa gets its data, basically, for satellite. And again, you get facilities around the world where there is telemetry, in other words, conveying messages between the satellites and the ground and control mission, and also getting data. Data comes in at level 0, which is like very big, like raw data. The data gets calibrated to, they remove faulty data, correct for issues that could happen between space and here. And then on level 2 is when it's really ready for users to interact with. And that's when you can you can get on your Google Earth or all sorts of things that you see, and you get your data like, oh, look at my house, kind of like thing. Yeah, that's where you get your data. And then the archival. So over time, what you have learned in science is that keeping data over a long time has value in itself. In fact, archival data has given more value lately, where more science is being done out of archival data than observational data. Several observatories are beginning to see this kind of trend. Or not beginning, but are taking this trend very seriously. There's really good value in keeping data forever. And then, of course, via the internet, or sometimes we literally take tapes and put them in boxes and ship them to the people who want the data. That's kind of like how the data back end sort of works. And here's an example of the one we have for our telescope, the Meerkat telescope, which was launched in 2018, sorry. And you see a similar kind of like thing. We receive data, we clean it up, we do all sorts of things, including imaging it, and then we archive it, and we are able to send it out to users. That's the summary of the thing. This is what I'm responsible for. This architecture is literally the same architecture. Modify this and that product within it that people use in the space sector, basically. Here's an example of images that Meerkat has produced, or our team has been able to produce over the last 5 years or 4 years or so. We have had some good center of galaxy images, work on outstanding research on these filaments that we found in space. Some of these things, several hundred kilometers, light years in size. This is really astronomical scale, really. We can talk about that a little bit more. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about data issues. What are the kind of like things that we get when we do our science? One of the things we struggle with or deal with a lot is data volume. Our current telescope, for example, produces at raw data about 100 terabytes a day. To think about 100 terabytes a day is, I don't know. I've lost those comparisons. Like we used to be able to compare this to how Netflix works and stuff like that. But this is essentially about 1,000 people watching Netflix concurrently over one night. And then we archive about 10 terabytes of that data a day. So we use a lot of storage. We are working at petabytes and stuff. The SKA telescope, which comes the next generation that's under construction, is going to need about 2 petabytes a day to archive. So you can see that the scales are literally multiple fold. It is truly exponential. And we have to keep this data forever. So that's one of the things that are a bit complex. You can imagine trying to keep most people don't even remember where the selfies they took 15 years ago are. So you can imagine the kind of complexities this digital data, which doesn't have a lot of history on Earth, compared to papyrus, which ages back 5,000 years. We're trying to keep that data in perpetuity. Is quite a challenge in its own right. Computing requirements. So on the computing side, we believe that we are on this edge of what I call de-hyperconvergence, mostly influenced by cloud computing. But you're looking at how people used to construct their data center changing completely, and keeping up with that architecture and building robust architectures out of that is something that we have to find the right skills, the right people, the right architects for, and keep pursuing this. This is quite essential compared to just say we'll put our data in the cloud and we can get into that on other spheres like independence of data, freedom of data, openness of data, cost of keeping data, reliability of a corporate-driven model, for example, and we can go on about that. Energy pressure, everybody is aware, and I'm not talking about load shedding here, but if you filled in your car in the last 2 months, you'll know that energy is not cheap, and you gotta be careful about how you spend your energy. If you follow financial trends, you know which way they're gearing towards energy. Everybody talks green, everybody talks all sorts of alternative energies, sustainable solutions, basically. And computing has to respond to that accordingly. If you followed things like Bitcoin mining, you'll be aware that some of those Bitcoin mines spend more energy than entire towns in South Africa. So the convergence of infrastructure, I've touched on that. Virtualization, which means your computer can basically be a form of, can be represented in data in itself, and therefore you don't have to physically have your own computer on premise. Storage abundance, while we do have data explosion, We do have what I call storage abundance, which is like it is predicted that over the next 10 years, we should have an era of infinite storage. But now remember, if you have infinite data and infinite data storage, you have to be able to manage this data effectively. Otherwise, it just becomes gibberish. Like the stars in the sky, if you don't know how to analyze them, it's just lights in the sky. We're getting very, very good revolution in network where we're getting very fast networks that are about thousands of times faster than the networks we have at very affordable prices. So we're looking forward to that revolution to enable all of this. So it's like almost like getting super highways. So that's a good thing. And then we got this trend or this new belief that instead of moving data to where it's going to be processed, we put computers next to the data. So you log onto your computer via those very fast networks, you do your computing right next to the data instead of moving it via the network. And then you leave your results there, or you take only the results you need there instead of moving the whole data there. That's a whole different kind of thinking. And analytics, of course, there's this concept of what I call science research in post-AI world. In other words, when computers become sufficiently smart, would they be able to have discoveries of their own, scientific discoveries of their own? Would they be able to, let's say, write master's thesis? If you think about how structured and predictable a master's thesis can be, you know, and when that happens, what are the implications to how human beings do science? And these are issues that we have to start looking into. Algorithms that can help us deal with the data deluge. What I call serendipity is where computers start having their own discoveries and innovations that we didn't even realize were there when you seek out to look. So these are the kind of things that we have to deal with in the next 15, 20 years. And accelerated discovery as a result of this set of things that go on. If you look at the skills needed today, we still need engineers, all sorts of engineers, including the ones who deal with storage. For many factors, including liquid emissions and all of these things, engineering innovation will always remain important to us, even in the era of quantum computing. In computing, infrastructure and computer engineers, platforms and DevOps, so people who know how to provide you computing as a service. What the popular word for that is cloud computing. I like to veer away from popular terms because they obscure important things. But yes, storage and archive engineers, computer engineers who are good at storing and archiving data, becoming more important. Programmers, as always. Data engineers, people who can keep, maintain, and streamline data, very important. Data analytics, people who can make sense and derive useful information out of data. Network engineering, and so on. And here's the most important thing, business enablement. I remember going to a school show, a science fair, where school kids are coming one day, and I asked them, I started explaining what I do, and this cohort of kids just left. And I'm like, oh, that's strange. Why are you guys just leaving like that? And they said, oh no, we come from a commercial school. We are going to be accountants and lawyers. We are not interested in what it is that you do. And I was like, almost taken aback, because we need program managers, we need lawyers, IP lawyers, contract management lawyers, all sorts of things. We need finance people because we run multi-billion rand projects. Supply chain managers, you try to get an innovative part out of the middle of China via the US for further customization and bring it to South Africa. You will know what I mean when I say you need a good logistics person. Health and safety, marketing and communications for people to know what it is that we do. Stakeholder management, politicians, communities, and so forth. International relations. Our projects, for example, includes more than 7 countries and several regions. Commercialization and public benefit, facilities management, roads, water, electricity, and all of those things that come into our environment. Standards management, ethics, and all of these things that are not necessarily found in the departments of science and engineering are very important skills. Qualities of the people that we need in our environment: versatility, dynamism, and so on. Basically, we need people who will enjoy being in this environment, who will take advantage of being in this environments by innovation, tenacity. You cannot really do without hard work in this place and tenacious trying and trying again until you succeed, because you cannot go to Pick and Pay to buy some of the solutions you need, quite frankly. Teamwork, long-term vision. You cannot think long, short-term. Anybody who is a professor can tell you about the 20-year journey before they could qualify to be a PI and do meaningful research. And continuous learning and development in an ever-changing world is indispensable. And of course, self-care. People have to be healthy in this environment, mentally, physically, socially as well. Okay, that's my time going, and I'm not even halfway through this thing. And then, of course, please bear with me for 5 minutes. I decided I'll just take you through some of the things that we see from space in our daily lives. Space to Earth economy, in other words, where we produce things in space, typically by sending things up and sending them back down, is responsible for about 95% of that $1 trillion that is predicted to be worth our space commerce. You look at, and that typically works, like I say, a ground station or an industry, they side things to space, and then there are receivers who sort of receive these things. And of course, like I said, the distance does matter, and we can get into that a little bit later. This could be used for education, health, entertainment, as I used DSTV as an example here. But it's a huge potential that we could have leveraged, for example, during times like COVID and so on. And we see people using this in agriculture. A lot of agriculture now is automating monitoring via space segment, the health of plants all the way to planting and irrigating plants. I think harvesting, the stock trade works a lot with this. You cannot do futures in agri-sector now without space. In oil, people are measuring reserves and therefore can predict the movement of the oil price using space observation. This is kind of like important if you imagine that a barrel of oil is $100 now. Mining, while you're sitting fighting for land, people can basically survey your land using satellite technology. Here is iron-based minerals that are being surveyed over this piece of land. And then you see your clay-based minerals. And then this, of course, they are overlaid on each other, and somebody can immediately tell you the mineral value of your land. Very different way from how people like Merensky discovered platinum in South Africa. This is a matter, it's a much less time. But more importantly, it emphasizes the importance of mission design when you design what your satellite is going to do in space, and data analytics, knowing what to look for. Here we see it in July 2021, we had the riots. Space basically giving you a perspective there. You can see the small bustling with life. And then you see it here all bent out, raided. Very tragic time in our history. Here are the floods from April. You can see this roads. You can see traffic congestion. This entire economy here, this environment here is destroyed completely. You can see this where goods were stored, and you can see they are all shattered there and destroyed. And this helps a lot. And here is one we did with the South African National Space Agency. So the skills we have in astronomy are interchangeable with the skills in space. And here's an example where we worked with South African National Space Agency to implement a tool that allows us to look at 40 years worth of space data to see if we can effect examples. This thing will only be launched in October. So you're seeing some of its first prototypes that we're still testing and trialing out. But I decided to focus on an environment, on a townships here in Hout Bay in Cape Town to see some of the interesting things. And this is how it looks on Google Earth, right? If you look on Google Earth now, if you move this thing, you can see how Imzamo 2 looked. So if you look at the shape of this thing, this is an abstraction of that. You can see in 2006, it basically looked like this in red. And there was talk about removing Imzamo 2 to make way and giving these people safe housing back in 2006. And you look here is in 2000 and, sorry, I made a mistake here. This is 2011. And you can see there's a slight growth there of this environment. You look again in 2020, all of a sudden this is filled out and there's new settlements rising in this area. And I raise this issue because you look at issues like service delivery, all of these things, and people are saying our government is not working for us. But between 2011 and 2020, there was only one census that was done. And that's how our budgets get allocated. And you look at the space history here, and you can see that the budget is wrong. There's definitely changes here, significant change here. And whatever you're putting in will not work. I took another picture here to show you how it looks closer on. You can see actually using an intelligent agent, that thing actually ignored all the houses that have roofs and basically settled on shacks. If you look at it like that, you can see all that space is occupied here by houses that actually have roofs. And you can see they were ignored by that thing. And that shows you how data analysis can work quickly. Here's another area in the same area. This used to be what is the formerly colored area. And you can see how in 2006, you look at the red line, and this is what it used to be. And you can almost see that it almost doubled in size. And it kind of goes to the question of service again, cost, and everything that goes with it. It kind of like makes you wonder about town planning and things like that. Here is a company that everybody has heard about, I hope. Where is my transport? That started as a hackathon at UCT and is now a global company that helps transport in the global world and others. So here is other trends in space. I don't know if the chair will let me know if I'm speaking over my time allowance. But here is future of space trends, as I spoke. So when they did the James Webb Telescope, they folded it so much and they quickly realized that going forward, any bigger instrument that has to be done will have to be assembled in space. So what is called space-to-space economy is a potential growth area where we will send assemblies and maybe in the future manufacturing as well in space. We're looking at things like maintaining satellites in space because one of those satellites can easily be worth $1 billion. So you could do things like refueling it, fixing it, using robotics in space. You're looking at what I call ubiquitous low Earth orbit space spots. So this is an example of a space spot in New Zealand that is actually quite a dynamic and easy to move around or build almost in every other country. It allows you to launch up to 140 kilometers, which is really what you need to reach the moon on an unmanned mission. I can talk about that in another conversation. And then, of course, space environmental activism. You've heard about a gentleman called Elon Musk, which is doing great things, I suppose. But one of those things is achieving is that is blocking the stars for further exploration of space by putting thousands of satellites within 500 kilometers and well within our line of sight. So 5 years ago, people would tell you about space debris as the biggest issue. Now people are just like, please, can we have windows where we can still see the natural sky? Our children literally will grow up and they will never be able to see space as we saw it with our naked eye, which is tragic, really. One of the missions that is in concept now is where if you combine things like space assembly and manufacturing, there's a concept design where they want to use what is called space sails to push a space probe, literally the size of this cup, up to a third the speed of light, and say within 12 years, that thing should be able to reach our neighboring star. And that would basically, in our lifetime or in the next generation's lifetime, we should be able to achieve interstellar travel, or at least exploration, which would be an amazing endeavor for humankind. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mwashe, for a very insightful presentation. I think I will open the floor to questions, but I myself also have a question. So I wanted to find out, are there limitations to the type of data that is collected in terms of boundaries? So for example, spying on people.
Spying on people. Okay. Let me see if I might have left something here, or I didn't put them in. So there are limitations. First of all, to see somebody from space, you need to have a resolution of about 25 centimeters. And to identify them, you need a resolution of about 5 centimeters, basically, or even less. Okay. That said, you can definitely observe movements of people. You can definitely observe behavior of societies. If you look at this here,
Yes.
If you look at this trend here, if this happens, you can basically do things like play the stock market based on your ability to identify trends like this really quickly. If you look at things like this, you can literally come here, buy land for a song, and be known to the host of that land or the previous owner that you have already done significant exploration already via space element. Things like this can determine the direction of entire economies and wars. A war without energy, you can almost gauge on that and perform against it. Agriculture, food, how food is priced globally, you can almost perform against that. So there's definitely a security risk that comes with this kind of dynamism.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Blessing Baleka. Blessing, you have the floor to ask your question.
And mute. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation. Am I audible, just to verify?
Yes.
Before I speak. Thank you so much. Something I took notice was when you mentioning the AI. I wanted to see if you came across OpenAI's beta initiative of coding AI, because you're referring to like AI which is capable of writing a master's dissertation. But what about AI which is capable of writing computer code? And that's something which I noticed from OpenAI. I wanted to know, do you think that could be potentially a threat, towards employment, for, yeah.
Two questions. Can AI write code? Possibly. There was a paper done where somebody made AI run through all the code repositories in GitHub. And they were using this thing to basically improve the productivity of the developers. Early stage, experimental. But let's hope that one day that can and may possibly be achieved. Employment. Of course, with every revolution that has come, everybody has promised, well, after this revolution, these jobs will move elsewhere, and we'll have different types of jobs. But the data analysis there says there are less and less jobs with each revolution, basically. But the real question really is quality of life. According to me, of course, which is, do you live better with every technology? If you're starving, of course, in the middle of Sudan right now, you don't live better. But if you are doing less risky job, less repetitive work, less injurious work, less dangerous work, I guess AI is better for you. With regards to programming, I don't know. Will AI one day be innovative? I think that's what we need to ask. I do not know if AI will be innovative one day. I just know that it will explore many more areas than we have been able to as human beings because of its, well, it doesn't sleep, it doesn't really eat, and it multiplies itself several times fold. Whether that research and exploratory nature will be useful to humanity. In other words, is it gonna matter that it was done to everyday life? That is a question that is yet to be answered. In Japan, they started a thing called the Fifth Industrial Revolution, which really was pointing to what I can call value-adding industrial, well, 4IR, using 4IR, for example, for home-based care and all these other things that human beings think they want to do, but really don't do, like taking care of the old, the sick, and the orphaned. So, yeah, I don't see anybody writing code for taking care of the orphaned right now. If AI could do that, that would be quite nice.
Thank you very much. We also have a few more questions. Francis says, within South Africa, we have issues regarding land reform where Black Africans sell out or sell to own land. What has been the ratio of space ownership within South Africa? How is it structured? Are they Black South Africans who have space ownership? Another question from Jabulo Banda says, can the presenter say a little more about how the satellites have been or can be used in the health sector? And then the last question from Ayo says, great strides made integrating satellite information with ground data vis-a-vis physical systems, considering the fact that storage is a major issue, as you mentioned earlier. How does SARO get around the issue with respect to data security?
Okay.
So
starting with a question from
2 minutes to answer the questions.
From Francis, land reform, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
Where has been ratio space ownership. Okay, let's look into a few terminologies there. Nobody owns space, right? You can participate in space. And this is one of the treaties from the United Nations, right? But let's look at this company here. It's called Quick Locate. Is a local company that uses geographical positioning systems, GPS, which is a space technology, to, I want to say revolutionize, but I'm not a fan of that word, but definitely bring efficiencies into the taxi industry, a Black-owned industry. And these guys do this by monitoring taxi fleets, the trips taxis have taken, the health status of the taxis, where they are going, how they spend their day, how many passengers they have. They have an AI agent within the taxi that helps with things like taxi fare count and things like that. It's a company started by young South Africans who are doing quite well implementing this across the country, and hopefully they will prosper. The biggest player in space in South Africa is MultiChoice, which is a child of NASPAS, which is a child of the Book de Bond. Make what you may out of that. It is the nature of our history. And hopefully in the future, we will see better innovation. Nobody's going to give you a piece of space. You're going to have to innovate into how you play in the space economy. I'll take you back to this image. Each one of these elements of space, the subject and the science and all of the others, are opportunities for innovation. If you can have a launch capability in South Africa, you can transport space objects into space. These things, along them, there are financial things, insurance, funding of projects, law around these other things. And there are so many other ways to participate in those areas. You look back at the skills. When I talk about skills, I'm not just talking about jobs, okay? We need to move away from the concept of skills for jobs, but rather skills as enablers of innovation, okay? And in my opinion, it is how we are going to benefit from the space boom, for lack of a better word. I hope that answers you, and I don't know if you're allowed for follow-ups. Then the next question was, how do we deal with data security as Sarau? I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't tell you. But, you know, in engineering, they say you're either making a weapon or a target. And Sarau is a target. So trust you me, we work day and night, not only on securing this infrastructure itself, but also the data that comes out of it. One may wonder, what do you do about astronomical data? Well, you know what? Scientific claims are being made against this data. Its security is important, its integrity and repeatability is important. And we got a team of people whose job is to make sure that that integrity is preserved in perpetuity. I don't know what the next question was.
The last question was on how can satellites be used in the health sector?
How can they be used in the health sector? Have you gone to a rural clinic and found only one nurse? You could benefit, for example, from telemedicine. You could benefit where your environmental monitoring is combined, for example. Pandemic planning is a good thing, where we can map places that have choleras, where water changes are happening, temperature changes are happening, trends around malaria and other environmental factors such as that, or environmentally born tropical and topical diseases, and manage those places better with information. Again, it is not the fact that you have data that matters. It is how you read, interpret, and synthesize that data and apply it in your operations that matters.
Thank you very much. We have our last question from Rethabile. You have the floor.
Hi, thank you so much. As said, my name is Rethabile Maboko. I would like to ask regarding the shift in position in South Africa towards space law. And I'm so glad that you do mention that the issue here is not about ownership. But what I'd like to ask is, because what I've realized is space law is quite internationalized, meaning that we can't create domestic laws. What we can do is create programs or policies from international law that come out from space treaties. And so I'd like to ask, what is the position in terms of policies and programs that we should have in maximizing our opportunities. So I'm not necessarily asking about whether or not we can compete internationally. That's not the question. The question is, what can we do to benefit from this kind of landscape?
The space law landscape.
Absolutely. And I'm getting that it's the satellite part, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. So, I mean, South Africa does have space manufacturing capability. We also we are a source of data and also a target of data. In other words, there are people like Boeing and ESA who collect South African data and seek to sell it back to us. There are contentious issues about that. Who owns the data? Who has the right to that data? Who gets to have privileges over that data? And these are areas of space law that were decided in the 60s that I believe are due for innovation. I gave an example about mining, for example. Should we find that somebody spied basically or illegally prospected using space segment in our country, are they still entitled to accrue the benefits of that knowledge? Should somebody have critical data about our security, our environment, weather, and so on, impeding disasters, for example, or national security threats? Should they see a fleet of ships coming here to conquer us? What are their obligations and stuff? We have seen intersections between space and maritime law, for example, in terms of water pollution and spilling of oil in South African offshore. For those of you who do not know, South Africa has more square kilometers in ocean surface than we do in land surface, for example. We're bigger in the ocean. And monitoring and looking into that, there are constantly eyes over our waters. When people notice crimes being committed in that, what is our regional legal position on that? These are areas where you just find either the law is too open, too narrow, no in situ law, and significant opportunities to be taken from there. I will not go into our copyright, intellectual property law around these matters, which is just absolutely shocking. Given that the current version in play was last written in 1970 something, and the one that is in draft right now is best not spoken about because it is just so recessive. Yeah, for many other factors. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying or if it actually does make sense to you. I'm not a lawyer by training, but I think I have dabbled in enough law to hopefully have answered you satisfactorily.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to also ask regarding the data you speak about, does South Africa have any interest in that kind of data? Because I'm assuming that that data would be quite valuable for countries where there's like something going on, proxies between other countries. But in South Africa, is there an interest to have access to that kind of data? And please just let me know specifically what kind of data are you referring to, data where someone is spied on us, or you mean just elaborate data?
So, the South African National Space Agency has more than 40 years of observational data, okay, sitting in an archive. Hence, we're working with them to realize the value of that data in this regard. This is an example of like spatial planning, like I said, city planning. But you know, in South Africa, it's more than that. This is geopolitical data. It speaks to a lot of things here. If you look carefully here, you will see that There are no schools, there are no hospitals, there are no such thing. I will take you back to what I said. It's not about whether you have the data or not. It's what do you read out of the data you have? And what does this tell you? What does this tell you about the safety of this environment, for example? Can a fire truck go through this? We know, without fail, this hill has to burn every 10 years. That's how the Finn boss work. Do these people look safe to you? So when you look at, do we have interest in this data? Of course we have interest in this data. The question is, are we capable of reading, interpreting, and actually using this data? Secondly, corollary to that, how do we know what data to ask for? And that's a semantic question, right? It's a philosophical question. How do I know that you have the data I need? I won't know until somebody demonstrates the value of that data. Like, hey, you shouldn't have had that data. We actually have laws that govern that kind of activity in our region. So specific data, there is so much data that is due, spectral data, multispectral data, SAR data, which is like using radar, for example. When during the floods, for example, we didn't have, South Africa doesn't have radar data, radar satellites. So what typically happens when you have cyclones in Mozambique and all of that, you get cloud cover for days. And all the visible spectrums cannot penetrate through the clouds, they get blocked. But radar data does. And that radar data available to us could save thousands of lives, essentially. It could improve how we respond to emergencies. Can we petition those who have set up that data to affordably give it to us and help us interpret it? Because the speed of interpretation also matter. Disaster management data is only as effective as the rate at which the nature of the disaster changes. So again, we are interested. We need the skills. We definitely don't have enough skills to do as much as we can with all the data that is available. And do we know how to petition for it? You're the one who raised the question about law. The reality is people who make the data own the copyright. And as you know, copyright laws are tricky at best, opportunistic at worst. So
thank you so much, Mr. Mwasheng, for your presentation. And please keep the questions coming in to everyone. But for the sake of time, we need to move on to our next presentation. I am honored to welcome Dr. Samuel Oyewole to the conversation. You have the floor.
Good evening from this part of the world. My name is Samuel Oyewole. I'm really pleased to be part of this webinar, and I really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation extended to me by the Institute. I've been asked to speak on the title, How Space Research Can Help Africa Meet the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal. I think the last speaker has covered some of the things that I need to cover in reasonable ways, so I will not take much of your time. In time of introduction to this particular discussion, space as, let me start by telling you that my background is in political science and international relations, and I'll be coming more from policy angle. And before I move on, at least I would like to acknowledge the present. I noticed in the presence one of the space policy experts I so much respect so much in Africa, Professor Kate Gochok. I think I noticed your presence in the audience. So to move on, space has evolved from from what our understanding of space has evolved from being a mysterious home of God to a domain of human exploration and exploitation, where we now look up to for power projection, prestige, and development and security for policy interest in space, especially since space age in 1957, when we have the first launch of the first satellites in orbit by Soviet Union. So in terms of African involvement in space, African involvement in space have moved or developed from being a believer of God's inheritance or inhabitants of space to onlookers in the early stage of a space race or space age. And from there, Africa became a beneficiary, African countries became beneficiaries of space research and development, and later Africa became involved, and today we are still involved in space research and development to certain level that we are going to consider very soon. So the objective of this presentation is to review space as a frontier of development, to determine the involvement of Africa in space, to assess the benefit of space research for development for SDG, for sustainable development goals in Africa, to assess the challenges of space research for SDG in Africa, and to examine how space research can be enhanced for development, for sustainable development in Africa. The conceptual framework for this particular presentation cover the issue of space research, and SDG. When we talk about space, from the perspective of those in social science, there have been an enduring debate around the meaning of space. For most people in arts, humanities, and social science, space has always been conceived as social space, whereby we have an economic space, political space, policy space, and the rest of them. However, in pure and applied sciences, we have a geometric space, whereby we have a geographical conception or shape, and we have length, breadth, and so many other conception of space as known in pure and applied sciences. In this context, we are talking about geometric space and particularly astronomic space. And for this purpose, there's another debate around where space cover. There are so many perspectives about that, but for most analysis, 100 kilometers above the surface has always been considered by most scientists as the beginning, the Kama line of space, and to that infinite world that is known by scientists and the one that is not known. So in terms of space research, we have disciplinary elements, disciplinary perspective, and the element. When we talk about discipline, we have the area of the law governed by the law of physics. And that also leads us to STEM as in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as an AHS, which is an arts, humanities, and social science. Those in art and humanity and social science are now coming up to provide the complementary perspective, not competing one, complementary perspective to support and to also aid space research. Apart from that, in terms of element of space research include astronomy, either optical or radio astronomy. I think the first speaker have covered some of the details around that. Again, we have satellite system and their purposes. The first speaker has covered much about that. The purposes of satellite system include for communication, navigation, Earth observatory, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and so on. And again, we have the manned and unmanned flights, of which this particular dimension is likely to lead us to the coming age of space colonization, as it is popularly known, or the quest of the US and other major power in the international system. In terms of SDG, the goals, SDG, the history of SDG dated back to Millennium Development Goal. And in 2015, it was replaced by Sustainable Development Goals, which has 17 objectives as identified here, which include poverty, good health, zero hunger, quality education, gender equality, clean water, decent work, and avoidable clean energy, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, to reducing inequality, responsible consumption and production, life below the water, climate action, sustainable city and community, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institution, partnership for the goal. So we are going to look at the relationship, in this presentation, we are going to look at the relationship between space research and these goals. But to start with, we are interested in the position of Africa, the involvement of Africa in space. And we can notice that there are so many space programs in Africa nowadays. At the regional level, we have African Space Agency that was established by the African Space, with starting from 2016 idea and strategy, African Space Strategy, with headquarters now in Egypt. We have RASCOM, which is the regional satellite communication, which has about 45 member states in Africa. Apart from that, we have HAM satellite constellation, which include Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Algeria, with the plan to work together and share data, satellite data, to assist each other in space adventure. Apart from that, we have national programs, which include, currently Africa has more than 20 space programs. There's more than 20 space programs across Africa due to different national programs across board. And that include those with agency, those with just centers and institution, one or two institutions to perform different activities in relation to space. Apart from that, we have different assets that make African to be recognized as an emerging continent in space. And we have a lot of astronomical facility across Africa. More than 13 African countries host different astronomical facility. And I must acknowledge this, that South Africa has the largest and some of the most powerful astronomical facility in the continent, including SK Square Kilometer Array, which is an ongoing project, as well as the SOT, which is the biggest observatory in Africa. A few other African countries like Nigeria, Egypt, also has their own observatory, although limited in size when compared to South Africa. Currently, there's no African country with launch pad, with operational launch pad and vehicle that can launch anything into orbit. Although South Africa maintains a capability that can actually be used for this purpose, but for now, no African country is using as operational, let me use the word operational, launch pad and vehicle. Again, in terms of ground station to track satellites, more than 20 African countries has this capability to track and monitor satellite in orbit, either foreign or the African-owned ground station. We have few foreign ground stations, such as the one in Kenya, owned by Italy and now by ESA, the one in Swapon in Zambia, and few others across. Again, we have satellite as another major asset when talking about space research. And many African countries, especially 12 African countries, have sponsored and operated 46 satellites in orbit since 1998, when Egypt launched the first, and South Africa followed up by the second in 1999. Out of these, we still have about 23 satellites in production across the continent. If you see the graph beside me, the right-hand side here, you see the asset of different African countries in terms of the number of communication satellites they are sponsored and operated in the last more than 2 decades, as well as Earth observatory satellites, as well as technological demonstration that are locally produced by those countries or produced by national of those countries. So now the prospect of space research for the prospect of space research for SDG, for sustainable development goals. In this consideration, we start with no poverty. Space program and space research generally have the prospect of contributing to mobilization of relevant resources, including human, natural, material, and space resources. In terms of human resources, for many African countries who does not even know the total number of their population, where they are located, due to long years of not conducting their census and not knowing their appropriate population, not knowing where people are, the population are concentrated or not. Space have offered the policymaker the opportunity to understand the expanding frontier of settlement and to know where people are residing, to capture off-map, earlier off-map population and mobilize them for national resources development and reduce poverty. Again, natural resources, space assets can be used to track, survey, and monitor concentration of different natural resources, and this can also be utilized to minimize or alleviate poverty in Africa. In future, space resources will also be very available as there is growing effort to mine space objects like asteroid, comet, and some possibly planet and our satellite, the moon. So another thing is to minimize climate and disaster vulnerability. When using space and assets can actually offer early warning system that can actually help to reduce vulnerability of the population to disaster. And this can also help to reduce poverty or alleviate poverty, as such disaster has actually affected so many people in Africa and return them or further press them into extreme poverty. Again, expand connectivity. Space, especially communication satellite, can be used to expand connectivity and opportunities. There are so many villages across Africa with little access to broadband, the cables. In such context, space satellite for communication can be used to connect this population to the rest of the world and offer them the opportunity that the globalization or the globe offer. The next one is zero hunger. In terms of the zero hunger, space can actually support production, distribution, accessibility, and availability of food across Africa and outside the continent. With precision agriculture, precision space can support precision agriculture by giving details about the weather, soil, and other details that are necessary to plant and to manage poultry in a way that will give precision, given the weather and other requirements that are necessary to support the decision maker of the farmers. And this will actually help in boosting production. And these are at the end reduce hunger or eliminate hunger. Another thing is in time of distribution. Space provides support for, especially the rural community, can provide support for the rural community to have access to the internet and the world, know where their market can be transferred to. And again, that will offer better distribution of food. Again, in terms of accessibility, most people across Africa now, a growing number of population in Africa now rely on ordered food online and all those stuff. So in all these cases, navigation and delivery of this food rely mainly on GPS, which is a spin-off of space research and development. Again, avoidability, because space is likely to support production, distribution, and accessibility. It will reduce this, it will expand the scale of production, expand the scale of distribution and accessibility of the people, and minimize cost because of the economic of scale. The next objective of SDGs is good health and well-being. I think someone asked this question earlier. How can space research support health sector? We have telemedicine, as explained by the earlier speaker. Telemedicine offer connection between underserved population, especially those in the rural community and the city, where there are concentration of doctors and qualified personnel. So through such communication, telemedicine bridge the gap between the city, the rural and urban area in terms of good health and well-being. Again, there is a growing effort to use zero gravity offered by the International Space Station to manufacture pharmaceutical research. And this has also been part of space contribution of space research to good health and well-being. Again, in terms of medical survey and decision-making, satellite data can offer support for policymakers to track environmental factors that can help to make decisions about particular outbreak of either epidemic or pandemic. This was mostly used by many countries, including South Africa, during the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, in terms of public health awareness, satellite data for satellites provide support in terms of internet, in terms of radio broadcasting and TV broadcasting to support health awareness, especially in a challenging period as we had during the pandemic. Again, in terms of quality education, that's another goal of SDG. Space can offer support in terms of e-learning, in terms of formal and informal dimension of e-learning, in terms of quality and quantity of people that have access to education. The quality in terms of having access to the best material available and the best institution available across the world. And again, in terms of quantity, that means many people, even without those that are working, can now have access to further education due to e-learning, which is also supported by satellite and space research. Again, in terms of STEM education, space research offers opportunity to also advance the frontier of STEM education as it is known currently in Africa. As explained by the earlier speaker, the first speaker already explained some ways that space research are used to expand the frontier of STEM education. The next one is general education and public awareness. In communication, passing necessary ideological indoctrination to the population and policy education and policy awareness. Satellites also provide support for communication devices that we operate in modern day to expand the cost of education. In terms of gender equality, public advocacy and awareness also thriving on social media and even to the remotest parts of the world, and specifically in Africa, due to space support for technological communication technology. And the next goal, the sixth goal is clean water and sanitation. Space supports can be found to be relevant in large-scale survey and monitoring of water bodies, including lake, reservoir, and other sources of clean water. So space object or satellite specifically can be used to track and monitor concentration of this particular clean water specifically. And again, to monitor sanitary condition and compliance to the law. Satellite data can be used to assess compliance to sanitary law and sanitary condition of different area in a large scale across the country. And this can actually help decision maker to assess the impact of policy and assess compliance to the law. The next goal of sustainable development is, the seventh goal is avoidable and clean energy. When talking about avoidable and clean energy, space research can support or inspire new thinking in energy research. There is a growing attention for nuclear fusion, difference between fusion and fission, due to understanding of the workability of the sun. And these are things that are likely to power the next generation or next revolution in scientific and technology as it relates to energy sector. And again, space can also support a large survey of concentration of wind, or where wind energy, windmill can be concentrated, where solar farm can be concentrated, and all those stuff. So space can offer reliable support in all this area. Again, to monitor energy distribution, a growing number of analysts and policymaker experts are using space satellite data to assess distribution of light. Actually, we can use this particular data to assess those locations where there's light and those locations without light. This can actually help in understanding energy distribution and then to help policymakers to make appropriate policy in this area. The next objective, the 8th objective of Sustainable Development Goal is decent work and economic development. In this area, space research can help to boost production and distribution, as earlier explained, and again to boost profitability and income. Again, space research can boost the prospect of a STEM job opportunity for those in that area. And again, it can help to reduce brain drain in Africa. Most Africans, after being trained with funding from Africa, subsidized education across the continent, they find their way out of the continent because of lack of opportunity for career advancement. So investment in this area can actually boost STEM job and reduce brain drain. The 9th objective is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Space strategy or space research can actually help to facilitate and monitor development of sustainable and resilient infrastructure. Construction of railway, bridge, road, long road especially, and other stuff can be better done with space support by having a large-scale survey available to construction workers and strategies to decide on how to construct and all details around that. So big infrastructure projects can be supported, decision around that can be supported with space research and infrastructure. The next thing is to inspire innovation in tech development. Space research has the prospect of inspiring innovation and tech development. Currently, there are a number of companies in South Africa that are spin-off of South African commitment to research in space, especially as it involves Sunsat satellite, as well as Sambadila satellite, and a few other satellites that was launched and developed and launched after that time. So that shows that space research can actually inspire innovation and tech development. Again, space, the next objective of Sustainable Development Goal is to reduce inequality. And in this area, space research can help in survey, monitor, and assess inequality in terms of distribution of facility across the country or in a particular city. It can also help, as shown earlier by the first speaker, he was able to show area, a particular part of the community where there's no hospital and school. So all these things can be, space research can support all the relevant decisions in this area to improve public awareness and to improve quality of decision-making in this area. Again, space can also help to open access to opportunities for those that are relevant and concerned in this area. The next goal is sustainable city. As the 11th goal is sustainable city and communities. In this area, space research can improve planning and monitoring of housing, urbanization, transport, waste, population, facility, and infrastructure. In this way, space research can support sustainable city and communities across Africa. The goal 12 is responsible consumption and production. In this area, space research can support efficient management of sustainable natural resources, production, environment. So in this way, managing natural resources can actually help in production, as well as the environment can also constrain or help in responsible consumption because it balances our production and consumption. So in this area, space data or satellite data can offer interesting support in this area. Again, space data or space research can help to improve supply chain and reduce wastage. There are so many production end up in waste drain because of weakness of many African companies or institutions in supply chain. So we can improve communication, and then especially to the remotest part of the continent, we can actually improve supply chain and reduce wastage, especially in the area of agricultural products in many African countries. The 13th goal is climate action. And in this area, space research can help with weather, land, maritime, and forest monitoring. And all these are very essential and key in climate action. How do we understand our weather? Satellite data can offer support in this area. Again, in time of land survey and monitoring in large scale, space research is very relevant. In maritime, as mentioned earlier by the first speaker, South Africa has a very large maritime space to monitor and police. Space research offer a very useful details and instrument in this area. Again, in early warning for disaster, space research offer very unique advantage in this area in early warning, and climate education, especially as it relates to communication to the remote part of the continent. The next goal is goal 14, life below the water, below water. And for that purpose, space research can support maritime population survey and monitoring. Specifically in this area, as it concerns many African countries, it can also help in monitoring illegal, unreported, and undocumented fishing across Africa, which is a common thing across Africa. Space data, satellite data can actually help to track this development. And overfishing is another thing in many parts of the continent. Satellite data can help to track and monitor some of these development. Again, to monitor maritime pollution and contamination is very important, especially in oil-producing states like Nigeria and Angola. And again, in other mining countries like South Africa, water contamination and all those stuff can actually be monitored using satellite data. And this can actually be very helpful, as mentioned by earlier speaker, in terms of keeping record for years. Satellite data can be compared over the years to show the variation in the maritime population and maritime certain chemical components in the maritime space. Next objective is life on land. And in this area, space research can help in conservation and sustainable use of forest, fresh water, and land, as well as in monitoring desertification, soil degradation, poaching, threat to biodiversity, and endangered species. Satellite data, especially in countries like Nigeria, has been used to monitor desertification in the north and soil degradation in that area. And threat to biodiversity has also been, satellite data has been used to assess all these things. Assessment is one thing. We will soon get to implementation and policy response. That's another thing entirely. The next objective, the 16th objective, is peace, justice, and strong institutions. In this area, space research can help to monitor human rights in hostile terrains. I came across a particular PhD thesis some time ago where that particular researchers used satellite data over this period of 6 months to monitor human rights abuse in a country like Sudan during the Civil War. And that particular study offers fantastic insight into the situation in that country by monitoring the particular the picture or the satellite imagery of the location before the invasion of the insurgent group or the military, and after the invasion. So it offers a very clear and very interesting perspective on human rights. Again, it's improved border security. Many African countries has an expansive border with limited personnel, key personnel to monitor and to cover all those borders. In this area, space support can actually be invaluable in improving border security. Again, to combat organized crime within and across the border, like insurgency, terrorism, armed banditry, trafficking, smuggling, and the piracy in the Gulf of Guinea and then Gulf of Aden. Space offers invaluable support or opportunity in this area. And countries like Nigeria have used some element of space support for the fight against Boko Haram and piracy in the country. South Africa has also developed constellation of 3 satellites recently to monitor its maritime domain. And these are evidence of how this particular space research can help to enhance peace, justice, and strong institutions. Again, to expand or develop the law enforcement capacity, institutional capacity of law enforcement agency, space support is very relevant. Again, defense capability of African countries can be boosted with satellite support space program. I need to mention this, that South Africa sponsored the first military satellite in Africa in 2014. Since that time, countries like Nigeria have established defense space administration and institution to manage defense space program. And countries like Morocco and Egypt have also sponsored military satellites since that time. So this shows the growing tendency and realization of space research in defense strategy of this country. Again, there is a relevance of space support for strategic decision-making, democracy, and good governance. In terms of democracy, let me use the case of Nigeria. In 2015, the Nigerian Electoral Commission approached Nigerian Space Agency to provide them with a mapping of the country. So in that process, the remapping of the country using satellite data actually helped the agency to determine and realize so many villages and new settlements that were not captured on static map that were available then. And as a result of that, a number of polling units was, a new polling unit was established and allocated to all those areas to expand political participation. Again, in terms of good governance, strategic decision-making can be made using space support. And the final goal, which is goal 17, partnership for the goals. Space can actually support foreign policy decision-making of countries in modern time. It can help in monitoring compliance to international laws and agreements. Again, space is the final frontier of cooperation. It can be considered as the final frontier of cooperation among nations. Now, beside the prospect of space or the benefit of space for Africa in achieving sustainable development goals, the next thing to be considered are the challenges of African countries in the area of space research and in its utilization for sustainable development in the continent. In this area, I identified 2 major challenges. And the first one, with many sub-points, is capacities and capability in space research. Most African countries have inadequate capacity and capability in space research. The first one is funding. Many African countries vote little amount to space research, which is understandable considering so many competing things for attention in national budget. So countries with highest budget in the continent include Egypt, Morocco recently, and Nigeria, South Africa. Fewer African countries appear to budget more than $10 million on their space program. So again,
I'm sorry, Dr. Simon. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sorry to cut you off. We will engage more in the Q&A. Please, could you just wrap up in 2 minutes?
Okay, in 2 minutes, let me quickly identify challenges. The facility are limited, the orbital assets are limited, data management limited, and again, in strategic policy gap that we have as challenges in Africa include inadequate utilization of available capability, policy inconsistency and over-politicization, policy coordination, weakness in policy coordination, public awareness are limited. Again, political will is also limited in Africa. Again, unilateralism and de-Africanism is another subject of concern. There's limited cooperation among African countries. And lastly, is this international political and economic dynamic that is affecting many African countries. In conclusion, space is the frontier of development. Africa is making progress in space. The prospects of space support for SDGs in Africa are bright. And finally, in time of conclusion, African potential in space research and SDG are undermined by the challenges identified earlier. And as a form of recommendation, improved space research capability is required, optimal utilization of available assets, improved policy coordination, improved political will, improved space popularization, Pan-Africanism and regional cooperation, and international support partnership are very important for Africa to use space research to achieve sustainable development goals. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Samuel. I also want to thank all the people who stayed so long. Thank you, Rati, and thank you to Mr. Ngwasheng. In fact, from both presentations, I'm not going to try and sum it up, but I did see a lot of interlinkages that could be used for not only my desk, which is the technology and society research area, but also for the human settlements and townships program that the Institute has just started up. I actually see a lot of synergies and a lot of work that can be done jointly. We only have time for about 2 questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please put up your hand. If not, we will make other opportunities to engage with the speakers. And also, we hope that a lot of you would come through to a lot of our future discussions around space in Africa. Is there anybody? Okay, Dr. Ogunubi, please. Could you just let him speak?
Well, I'll just quickly ask my question. I don't want to take much of your time. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Samuel. I know the part that concerns me, I have quite a lot of questions, but I will just focus on the part that really concerns the research that I do. You do know that there are a lot of competition among African states, which you would always see in mundane and scholarly debates. Sometimes you have conversations about why, how, I won't go into all of that. My question basically is, in terms of the territorial power that comes with space research, what is the extent of cooperation that exists among states? I mean, states that have capacities, I know you touched on that briefly, but I wanted to expand on that a little bit. States that have capacity, among states that have capacity, and states with capacity along with states that don't have the capacity to advance for space research to advance African development. And within the context of power politics in Africa and how this partnership can be, and what are the platforms to enrich this partnership among states and within states without capacities?
All right, thank you so much for the great presentation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to make my question brief, and I'm going to link it to the previous presentation. I saw that the previous presenter alluded to the use of satellite imagery to detect the geography on the Earth and to also find mineral deposits. But I want to see if there was potentially another use case application for this technology for early detection of seismic environmental disasters. Based on that, so to see perhaps maybe you could gather enough data to assess whether or not there's going to be an earthquake. Yeah, because you alluded to that there is early detection of natural disasters, but was it purely environmental, or did it also cater to geographical? And also, could it also be something used to assess disasters which are within space itself?
Dr. Samuel, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the question. Dr. Ogunubi asked a question on the relevance of, the possibility and ongoing cooperation between countries with capability in Africa, space capability in Africa, and those without in Africa. I think a lot of cooperation are involved in this area. Here, HAM's satellite constellation was devised in Africa around 2003. As at then, only Algeria and Nigeria has a enduring Earth observatory satellite in the constellation. And to identify this, Nigerian satellite data are freely available when it comes to disaster management without charges to any country that require them. So apart from that, despite the so-called competition or sense of competition between some of the great power or the leading countries in Africa, we can still see Egypt committing itself to African Space Program by hosting African Space Agency, as well as South Africa sponsoring this particular technological university with a branch in Nigeria, whereby we have the Nelson Mandela Space Institute in Abuja. So, and when you look at this, you see connection between developed and developing, or those that are relatively advanced by African standard and those that are just coming up. In time of SKA program as well, square kilometer array program, so many African countries are benefiting from this program, including Ghana, Kenya, Zambia, and so many other countries because of South Africa. And all these shows or point to evidence of cooperation among these countries in the spirit of Pan-Africanism. On the second question by Dr. Blessing on possibility or the prospect of space research for monitoring seismic action and threats in time of disaster threats. That's very clear. It's possible in Africa and any other part of the world. Space research can support, satellite data can support early warning in time of to predict or to preempt and prepare for possibility of natural disaster or environmental disaster happening in any part of the world. And then let me give you an instance. In 2006 or so, during the Hurricane Katrina in the US, Nigerian Sat-1 was the first satellite to pass across that area, and Nigerian government shared the available satellite data with the US to support their response to that particular threat. So that shows that actually satellite data and space research generally can be used to prepare and as well as to respond to threat of natural and environmental disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since we're about to close up, Dr. Samuel, you can give your parting shot, and Mr. Ngwasheng, if you'd like to also give your parting shots before we close up.
Okay, thank you for that. We strongly encourage African countries to work together in time of space collaboration. That will actually help Africa to rely on each other and minimize cost. If South Africa has these particular assets that Nigeria does not have, or that Egypt does not have, working together, having constellation of satellites will actually help the continent better to have multiple access to multiple data source. And with that, we can actually rely more on African content than foreign content and pay lesser amount of money to foreigners while we rely on each other. Different countries in Africa rely on each other to support each other. Again, political will should be very considerate and optimum utilization of available assets. There are so many assets owned by African countries that are not optimally used. So they are just wastage, wasteful projects without much benefit to derive from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ngwasheng?
Okay. First, thanks to the audience for taking the time to listen to us. But also, I just want to leave with a parting shot. You don't need anybody's permission to be a participant in the space ecosystem. And the space ecosystem is quite vast. There's plenty for a lot of people, lots of value as well in different aspects of this, whether it's mission design all the way to the end user segment. So go out there and do amazing work in the space segment. Be innovative, be creative, and trust that whatever you do will do well. This is really open territory for all sorts of amazing ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that there's a question in the Q&A, but unfortunately, because we've gone out of overtime, I will send it over to whoever you directed the question to. I'd like Kamo to do the vote of thanks so we can close off for this evening. Kamo?
Thank you, Doc. Good evening, colleagues. My name is Kamukalo Sofone, and I'm a research assistant at the Institute for Pan-African Thoughts and Conversation. And we'd just like to thank our speakers for the insightful conversation, as well as the participants for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us, as well as engaging. And a big thank you to our technology and society lead, which is Dr. Odilile Ayodele, for organizing this webinar. As you would have seen in the chat, the Technology and Society in Africa Conference is taking place from the 20th until the 21st of October, and it will be co-hosted by 3 institutes under the University of Johannesburg. So please click on the link that Dr. Odi has shared in the chat to see how you can participate in the conference. And if you have any queries, please direct your questions to the Technology Society 2022 @gmail.com email. Thank you and have a great evening.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.